Heaven Official's Blessing. Chapter 246. Audio source: WuXiaWorldAudiobook.com. Extra: The Crown Prince's Bizarre Memory Loss Adventures. Wawa picks up an amnesiac Lian Lian. Warning: sexual harassment, victim blaming. The moment Xie Lian opened his eyes, he discovered that he was lying on the floor. It was a strange room. He felt extremely confused. He had clearly been cultivating in the Holy Royal Pavilion on Mount Taikang, so why was he here? Feeling mildly at a loss, Xie Lian sat up from the floor. He discovered that he was wearing a set of simple, white robes that were really just a bit too simple, crude and lacking in detail like a poor commoner. The material was also not good, its texture rough, rubbing against his skin in a way that felt uncomfortable. Xie Lian wrinkled his brow and thought about standing up from the floor. He did not expect that the moment he stood, he would discover even more places where his body felt uncomfortable. His hips hurt, his legs hurt, his abdomen hurt, his neck hurt. Could this be the result of spending a night lying on the floor and catching a chill? Impossible. Besides, he wasn't that delicate and frail. What about Feng Xin and Mu Qing? Recalling them, Xie Lian called out, "Feng!" Cough, cough, cough. Even his voice did not feel very comfortable. He remembered, last night, Feng Xin and Mu Qing had once again started fighting over a small, trivial thing, making so much noise to the point that it was impossible for him to meditate. As such, he had ordered them to continue arguing outside. Having listened to them trade, with great resentment and irritation, more than 200 lines, Xie Lian had begun to feel drowsy, and took a rest. How was it that upon waking up, he had fallen into such an unthinkable and muddled situation? Supporting himself on the side of a table, Xie Lian finally stood up, and surveyed his surroundings. This place should be an inn, but generally speaking, if he did not choose to camp, but chose to stay at an inn instead, he would not have chosen to stay at such an inn that was clearly budget. His hands and legs had not been tied, and the room door was not locked, so this meant that he had not been in prison. If someone or something was plotting against him, then what point did throwing him here have? The more Xie Lian thought about it, the more bizarre he found it, but the most bizarre was still the present state of his body. Tolerating the ache in his arms, he removed his outer clothes, ready to survey what sort of injuries he had on his body. But unexpectedly, upon removing his outer clothes, when he lowered his hand to look, his whole face went pale in an instant. From his abdomen to his chest, all were densely covered with ambiguous red marks. It was as though large flower petals had fallen and blanketed skin that was as pale as fine white jade, like the blooming of blush red blossoms. So red were they that he was stunned, and he lunged in front of the mirror by his side to take a look. Indeed, not just on his chest and abdomen, they were even on his neck, even on his back. Xie Lian did not dare remove the clothes on his lower half to continue to look. The situation was very clear. At some point when he had been unconscious for a reason he did not know, someone had defiled him. It was the first time in his life that Xie Lian felt weak in the legs, but he steeled himself and held on, and stood firm. He had very early on in the past listened to the chambermaids who waited on him talk about some of the scary legends from outside the palace, such as black-hearted people who worked on the black market and who specialized in abductions for nefarious or sexual reasons, drugging maidens before doing bad things. But, Xie Lian clutched his head in both hands, muttering, "But I'm a male." His appearance now was truly indeed unsightly. Besides these love bites and bruises where he had been held with too much force, there were even embarrassing bite marks. Xie Lian covered his face, feeling as though his head was feverish while his body was cold. Suddenly, he remembered something that was extremely serious. Oh no! His cultivation path required absolute chastity, but from this, hasn't he committed a great taboo? Xie Lian hurriedly gave a try. Upon a try, as expected, he no longer had any magical power. Xie Lian was typically considered quite calm, but under the present situation, he felt as though he was about to collapse. Inexplicably, upon waking up, he had become like this. Feng Xin and Mu Qing were both missing, and he himself still did not know who had used what method to beguile and defile him. He really wanted to collapse. After a good while, he was still unable to accept this reality, and he felt terribly upset. But he also could not continue to be in a daze like this, and so, he had no choice but to carelessly pick up and put on his clothes, and left the inn. No one tried to stop him on his way out. Xie Lian breathed out in relief, and did not care that even the buildings all around him, the clothing of the passers-by and their accents were all quite strange. But perhaps because there was a niggling feeling in his heart, he kept feeling as though other people could tell that something had happened to his body, and that they were measuring him with odd stares. This made him pick up speed as he walked, until in the end, he was running madly. He rushed into a patch of forest, and with one punch, punched a tree. The tree snapped with a crack. He yelled angrily, "Asshole!" He wanted to use the foulest language to curse and scold the person who had done such things to him, but after tossing and turning all he could only scold. Scoundrel, shameful, bastard. 3 And he just could not vent the fire in his heart, leaving him suffocated. But he also could not let loose and cry, and so he could only keep it in and strike out wildly. Pung 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 pung. He knocked down tens of trees in a row, knocking them down until finally the very ground on the spot crawled up to hug his thighs, yelling and crying, "Your Highness the Crown Prince, Your Highness, don't hit anymore." Xie Lian's heart was full of fury, but this old man had suddenly emerged from the ground, and was clearly not an ordinary person. The sight left him slightly startled, and he said, "Who are you?" The old man wiped his tears and said, "I am the ground here, Your Highness. This patch of forest was raised by me. If a senior like you four keeps hitting, I would have nothing left." Xie Lian thought to himself, after all this did not concern anyone else, and he should not act indiscriminately in anger. Besides, even though this was a small god, he was still a god, and he was old, and should be respected. As such, he reluctantly held back some of his fire, pulled back his hand, slowed his breaths, and said, "Sorry, it was I who was acting out. How about this? Let me pay you for all the trees I had knocked down just now." The ground released his hands that had been hugging Xie Lian's thighs, and hurriedly said, "No no 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 no, no need, no need. How can a senior like you be expected to pay? The fact that you are willing to speak to me, graces this little god's place with glory." Xie Lian felt that it was a little odd. No matter how it might be said, this ground was still a god, and by the look of it was much older than him, so why was he so afraid of him, even calling him a senior like you? But he did not have the mood to inquire further, and courteously asked, "Since you're the ground of this area, you must know the ins and outs of this area very well. Can you help me look for 2 people?" As he said that, he reached his hand into his sleeve with the intention of retrieving a few gold leaves as payment, but the ground saw his action, and hurriedly and frantically waved his hands. "No need, no need, no need. Who do you wish to find?" Coincidentally, Xie Lian also did not pull out anything. He took out his hand, and said, "My 2 attendants, Feng Xin and Mu Qing." The ground's expression suddenly became very strange. Xie Lian said, "What's wrong? Is there a problem?" The ground said, "No no no no, no problem at all. It's just what was with His Highness. It's been 800 years, and he still calls the General Nong Yang and General Zhan Zhen his attendants. Who knows whether if the 2 generals would be angry? Sigh, forget it, it didn't matter if the 2 generals are angry. If this person did not serve him well, then it would be more terrifying when that person got angry. And so, he said, please wait here for a while, I'll immediately conduct a search for you." Xie Lian said, "Much obliged." He bowed in courtesy, and when he lifted his head, the ground had long since disappeared. Xie Lian felt as though his head was still feverish, and he held his forehead. After goodness knows how long, he heard a doubtful voice before him say, "What's wrong?" Xie Lian lifted his head, and saw Feng Xin and Mu Qing. However, it was not a Feng Xin and Mu Qing he recognized. In truth, both their appearances hadn't changed, but the air about them was different, no longer like two brash youths, but rather like two generals who had experienced many victories in the arena. Furthermore, they both were wearing expensive and luxurious black robes, not like the sort which regular people could wear. At least, never had Xie Lian seen them wear such clothes. The person who had asked was Feng Xin, walked over and said, "Your Highness, what are you doing here by yourself?" Xie Lian said, "I'm the one who should be asking, where did the both of you run off to? I let you both go outside to argue last night. Why did you disappear this morning?" Feng Xin and Mu Qing both showed expressions as strange as the ground, as though they did not understand what he was saying. Xie Lian's head hurt as though it might split, and he said again, "What's with both your get-ups? What's going on?" Feng Xin lowered his head and studied himself, and said doubtfully, "What's wrong with these clothes? Aren't they very normal?" Mu Qing then said, "What are you saying? Did you lose your wits when you slept? I was not at your place last night." Xie Lian hugged his head. He wanted to yell and scream, but he resolutely forced himself to remain calm, and after considering for a while, said, "I understand. You're both like me, and are being held at ransom by something." Feng Xin's and Mu Qing's expressions grew more and more strange. Feng Xin said, "I've been remiss. Your Highness, why don't you say why you had summoned us?" Mu Qing rolled his eyes, and said, "There's no need to ask. Like I said, for him to ask someone to look for us, and not look for that person, it is 80% likely that there's something wrong with his brain." Xie Lian completely did not understand what they were talking about, and said, "Who is that person?" "The head priest." Feng Xin and Mu Qing looked at each other, and after a pause, Mu Qing took a step forward, saying, "Your Highness." Xie Lian said, "What?" Mu Qing said, "My memory right now is a bit fuzzy. Can you tell me, do you remember what we have been doing these few days?" Xie Lian said, "Haven't we been cultivating in the Holy Royal Pavilion these few days?" Mu Qing said, "Where is Hua Cheng?" Hearing this name, Xie Lian felt a strong sense of familiarity, but after thinking about it, he indeed did not recognize it, and so, he suddenly said, "Who is Hua Cheng?" Mu Qing said, "All right, I get it." He cast a glance to the side, and stepped aside to discuss with Feng Xin, whose expression was dumbfounded. Xie Lian suddenly felt that this was rather suspicious, and warily said, "What did you get? What are you two talking about?" Having finished their discussion, the two people turned back. Feng Xin said, "Your Highness, let us go." Xie Lian grew even more suspicious. "Go where?" Mu Qing said, "We'll take you to see someone who can solve the present situation. Come along." By now, Xie Lian was already 8% wary, and he took many steps back. Seeing that Xie Lian wanted to flee, Mu Qing said, "Don't go." He reached out his hand and brandished a bolt of spiritual light, as though planning to restrain him. But how could Xie Lian not leave? Run. The moment he ran, Feng Xin and Mu Qing felt as though they were in over their heads. The two of them chased and roared into the wind, Feng Xin saying, "Fuck me. I'm really fucked. How did this happen? Even if he has amnesia, it can't be this severe. Forgetting 800 years altogether?" Mu Qing said, Finally, he's damaged his brain from eating all sorts of nonsense. How can this be? I'm afraid he may have met with an accident while out alone. Let's hurry up and find him. His mind right now is of a 17-year-old. Even at this time, Mu Qing did not forget to get in a few digs. Yeah, the naive, silly, and pampered His Highness the Crown Prince. Wait, let's tell him first. Hurry up and tell him first. Something like this happening, of course one had to tell that person first. Xie Lian ran 20 li in a breath, slightly gasping only when he finally stopped. He felt as though he was still caught within a giant, confusing and foggy net, and had yet to escape. Just on Earth was going on? Things were abnormal. Far too abnormal. Didn't he have clear knowledge of Mu Qing's powers? To cultivate that sort of spiritual light, he would have had to cultivate for at least a few hundred years more. How could this now be the real Mu Qing? He must be a fake. And he himself wasn't normal. He only discovered with this run that his body's movements were light as a swallow. Even though his movements had always light as a swallow, but now, his body's skills were faster, stronger. Everything was not right. Calm down, and calm down again. Xie Lian suddenly remembered, just now, Mu Qing seemed to have mentioned a name. He had muttered, Hua Cheng. For some unknown reason, this name should have been very unfamiliar to him, but the moment he said it, his heart seemed to move faintly, as though a flower had bloomed in some corner in his heart. And so, he could help but say this name out loud a few times, back and forth. Hua Cheng, Hua Cheng, Hua Cheng. This must have been a very important person, perhaps the key to the present situation. He would have to find him first. Having reached a decision, Xie Lian walked towards the city. Even though Xie Lian was completely unable to accept it when he first discovered that something had happened to his body, he began to calm now. Even though his heart and body still felt uncomfortable to the extreme, but with the present puzzle that he was in, he did not have time to fret. The real Feng Xin and Mu Qing were still missing without a trace, and until he uncovered the perpetrator behind the scenes, he had to pull himself together at once and investigate the truth. And so, when he stepped into the city, he had regained complete calmness. Picking a tea house at random, he picked a seat by the window on the upper floor, but did not have the mood to drink tea. Xie Lian picked up a cup from the table and examined it. Inside the cup were some old tea stains that could not be wiped away. The sight made him exhausted, and put the cup down and ignored it. In the tea house, a rather pretty young lass was holding a pipa, strumming and singing, while a circle of men of various ages sat and leered at her. The girl had originally been singing a common, local folk song, about a maiden heading out early to pick flowers, etc. But she had barely sung for a while when a group of old men said, meaningless, not pleasant to listen to, change. Yeah, this song isn't nice to listen to, change the song. At a loss, the singer had no choice but to take on their suggestions, and change to a famous erotic song, the melody slow and soft, to the point that the listener would blush and their heart quicken. Only then was the group of onlookers satisfied, and called out their approval. But to Xie Lian, who sat in his seat by the window on the second floor, it was extremely inappropriate. Carefully listening to the lyrics, it appeared to be about the honey-sweet passions of a young husband and wife on their marriage night, and was indeed audacious to the extreme. Had he heard it in the past, he would have ignored it like wind by his ears because it did not concern him, as never in his life would he have ever thought of doing such things. But now, it was not quite the same. Even though he completely did not remember what had happened, but something had happened, and when listening to such things, one's thoughts would be different. Furthermore, he had discovered something frightening. His thoughts were completely beyond his control. While the song was 30% light and teasing, his emotions swung back and forth 100%. Furthermore, many fractured images arose in an endless stream in his mind. 2 hands, their fingers tightly interlocked. Between the fingers a red thread wrapped firmly and never to be undone. And even seemed to hear, by his ear, broken gasps, begging sobs, as well as a man's seductive low voice. What were all these? What were all these? Xie Lian felt both embarrassed and vexed, and biting his lip, clenched his fist tightly. The next moment, at breaking point, he was finally unable to bear it any longer, and viciously slammed his hand on the table. The pung sound startled the customers at the few tables nearby, who looked at him with wide eyes. Only then did Xie Lian come to himself with a start, and apologized quietly. He desperately wished to use both hands to stop his ears, so that he could no longer hear anything. He thought to himself, if she kept on singing, then he would leave. Suddenly, the singing stopped abruptly, and a sharp scream pulled him out from where he had been lost in his thoughts. When Xie Lian jerked his head up, to see that group had surrounded the singer, and seemed to be baiting her. The singer hugged her pipa, and stood up in fright, saying in an upset voice, "My lords, it's enough for us to listen to my songs, stop touching me." A few of the men said in a coaxing manner, "What's wrong with touching? After all, it can't be only us to have touched. I refuse to believe that you haven't been groped by a few people while out selling your trade." The singer was so upset that her eye sockets were red. She said, "What do you mean, selling my trade? I sell my songs, not my body." But the surrounding people deliberately did not hear her clarification, and said, "Hey, you speak as though you're a virgin. If you were really proper, you wouldn't be out selling yourself. Yeah, singing that song just now to entice people, and now saying that you're not for sale. What sort of Pilu 5 are you trying to erect? Totally laughable." The singer was so angry that she could faint. In a trembling voice, she said, "It was all of you who let me sing it. It was all of you who let me to sing it that I sang it." However, no matter what she said, that group of ill-hearted listeners always had words to counter. "So you'll sing just because we let you sing it? So obedient? This indicates that you had already planned in your heart to sing it in order to seduce people." Xie Lian could not bear to listen further. He was already feeling angry, and now he felt even more outraged. A white shadow flashed, and before that group of cat-calling men realized what had happened, they had been knocked down in a row. The man who was leading the crowd landed with his ass to the floor, and he scolded loudly. "Who the hell do you think you are? You dare to anger us?" Xie Lian stood protectively in front of the singer. Even as he cracked his knuckles, his face did not show any sign of anger. He said in a deep voice, "Let's stop right here. Faced with such a beauty, anyone's heart would be moved. But if you do not know how to treat her with courtesy, then that is shameful and despicable." Someone shouted. It was clearly she who started singing first. "She can sing as she likes, but we can't touch as we like." But Xie Lian said, enunciating each word and sentence, "That's right. It is indeed that she can sing as she likes, but you guys can't touch as you like." Even before he finished speaking, he had tossed 7 or 8 burly men downstairs to the floor below. They landed on their asses, and their falls filled them with fright. In truth, none of them was heavily injured, but it was enough to make a point. After all, no one could see clearly how Xie Lian had attacked, so how could anyone even talk about counter-attacking? In a panic, they scattered. Upstairs, Xie Lian looked back. The singer stood up and, with great gratitude, bowed towards him, saying, "Many thanks to this Daojang 6 for breaking up this crowd." Xie Lian. It was no more effort than raising my hand. "Lady, do you still intend to remain here?" The singer nodded her head. Xie Lian nodded his head too, saying, "All right, then continue singing." Saying that, he resumed his seat, adjusted his robes, and sat with his clothes on straight, where he kept watch. The other men, seeing that he did not leave, looked in their direction, but as expected, did not dare bother them anymore. The singer, understanding his intentions, felt even more grateful. When she next opened her mouth, it was the lively but common, local folk song. Xie Lian poured himself a cup of tea and was about to drink, when he lowered his head and once again noticed the tea stain. He hesitated for a moment, but still could not overcome how he felt, and put down the teacup, sighing. Unthinkingly, he turned his head back, and froze. Facing him across the street, in a many-storied winehouse even more elegant than the tea house he was at, sat a person on his own. It was a tall man dressed in red. Even though he wore a black eye patch, which added a bit of an air of wildness to him, it did not hide his handsomeness. His clothes were as red as maple leaves, his skin as white as snow, and his hand held a silver cup filled with wine which reflected light like his silver vambraces. Even with one glance, he was eye-catching to the extreme. He was looking in Xie Lian's direction, facing him from the distance. Seeing that he had now caught Xie Lian's gaze, he gave a faint smile, and raised his cup lightly, as though paying his respect to him across the distance. For reasons inexplicable, the moment Xie Lian's gaze met this man's, he felt as though a current had passed throughout his body, and he hurriedly retrieved his gaze. However, even though he pretended to be nonchalant, his heart thudded wildly. How strange. That man was indeed glamorous and eye-catching, with a secretive and mysterious sort of allure. However, it wasn't as though he hadn't seen men as glamorous as this in the past, so why was he having such a reaction to this man? Thinking about it, he once again quashed this line of thought. This was totally incorrect, because, having considered carefully, he had indeed never met a handsome man as glamorous as this in the past. His thoughts having reached this point, Xie Lian thought to himself, this person must be someone very rare. I had best be more mindful of him. He turned his head back. However, looking across this time, the man in red had instead disappeared. To think he had disappeared just like that. Like a brightly colored maple leaf drifting down, flashing mischievously before his eyes, brightening his world for an instant before vanishing. As though it wasn't real, but an ephemeral dream or bubble. Cautiously peering again at the elegant winehouse for a while, but still not seeing any sign of the man, Xie Lian finally gave up. He did not know whether he felt a little disappointed. He exhaled lightly, and kneaded his brows, thinking, forget it. Unexpectedly, when he looked back again, he discovered that, at some point in time, unbeknownst to him, someone had sat across him at the table. The someone sat with his cheek propped on a hand, and was staring at him. The two men's gazes connected. Xie Lian startled lightly, but the person said with a small smile, would this Dao Zhang like to treat me to a cup of wine? It was the man, dressed in red, who had raised his cup to greet him from across the distance. MXTX Author's Notes. Lin Lian had a little accident while out, losing his memory. It's not a case of him swapping consciousness with his past self. There is no change in timeline, so the crown prince of the past will not have this stretch of memories. The main purpose of this extra is for Big Wawa to get to experience the 17-year-old crown prince. Of course Arlian will definitely recover his memories. I assume no one was worried that he wouldn't recover them. I've discovered that every time, there would always be people worried about the most obvious questions, so I felt that it would be better to say it out. Translator's notes. Ching Tang Gu Shui, literally a clear soup with few ingredients in it. A poor commoner's fare. Xie Lian likens his robes to such a soup. Chang Yu Jia Long. Pinyin, Nu Jia Long, a game where one person says the first half of a Chinese idiom, and the other person completes the second half. Each Cheng Yu usually comes in 4 words. In the text, Xie Lian orders Feng Xin and Mu Qing to go outside to continue Cheng Yu Ji Longing. Since we can, quite reasonably, assume that they weren't actually playing this game, lol. I think it gives a pretty good idea of just how Feng Xin and Mu Qing were cutting off each other mid-sentence. Hundan, Hunzhong, Hunchu. It's funnier in Chinese because he uses 3 similar-sounding curses which start with the same word, Hun. I've tried to use English curses that sort of capture the feel of the Chinese curse words in this context. Senior like you. Pinyin, Nin Lao Ren Jia. Note that Nin is a more respectful way of saying you, Ni. Lao Ren Jia literally means old person or old fellow. Pai Lu. Pinyin, Pai Fang, a simply Chinese-style archway. Daozhang. Pinyin, Daozhang. This is an honorific used to address Taoist priests or simply cultivators in general. The character Dao means path, the same character from the word Taoist, while Zhang means leader. End chapter.